All right, what is going on, guys? Blacklisted Voice, episode 54. We are here with Dave and Anthony of i99Fit. What is going on, guys?
Hey, what's going on, man?
How's it going?
Not too bad, not too bad. Thank you for coming on. You guys have actually worked with a couple of my clients here, and they've had nothing but very positive results from you guys. So, thank you.
Yeah, we usually get that.
Yeah. Can you guys go into a little bit more of your background? So I guess personally, I've been in the industry for or the CrossFit side of things for about 10 years now. And it wasn't until about 2 years ago that I saw you guys kind of popping up on the radar. So how what is your guys' background and how did you guys kind of get involved into CrossFit?
Yeah, so I have been, both of us have been gymnastics coaches for 25 plus years, and so I brought i99 to CrossFit through my own experience, right? I started off as as a CrossFit athlete. I walked into the gym day one, my first CrossFit workout, and they asked us to do handstand push-ups. And thankfully, my background in gymnastics made that pretty easy. Even though at the time, I was out of shape and had been working at a day job that I didn't get any time to work out or whatever. And then, so I went through the typical thing that most people do, right? Especially if they're out of shape, they all of a sudden get in great shape, right? CrossFit is just a miracle, right? Then after doing it for about 6 months, I dropped 80 pounds just to go take it across one course. And when I did, it was very revealing. I was like, whoa, wait a second. We have got to do something with this because, the approach to gymnastics in CrossFit just wasn't aligned with what I knew, gymnastics to be. So then I started i99Fit at a local gymnastics school. And then within I don't know, maybe a month or 2 months.
Yeah, not very long.
Anthony was the right guy to go to come on and amplify what we're doing and just hit more people with good gymnastics coaching. So that's kind of how we got into CrossFit.
Yeah.
Was we started there with regular classes, and then we just expanded, right? We started doing remote coaching in clinics and seminars around the country, and then now we're really doing a lot of just personal training. And taking our curriculum and spreading it out with athletes all over the world.
Sweet. So you said the approach to gymnastics from what you learned at your level 1 was very different than what you know or knew. What were some of those differences that you kind of noticed right off the bat? And did you notice some in your group classes?
Oh, huge! Back when we created i99 was i99 was like 9 years old, right? So back in those days, they were still teaching this concept of strict gymnastics first, which is the opposite of how it works with when you have a little kid that walks into a gymnastics school for the first time, they're behind their mother or whatever. They can't do an L seat. They can't do a pull up. They literally can't do anything that requires strength. But so what we do is we start with basics. We start with movement first. So this idea that strict came first and then movement came second was foreign to me, right? We actually start with movement until the athlete can actually freeze and so they move and then all of a sudden they hold a position for a half a second, right? And then from there they hold for 2 seconds and they hold for 3 seconds. So it was just backwards to me that we were learning strict gymnastics as opposed to learning dynamic gymnastics first. And that's just how it works, right? So for me, that was the part where we could bring a big value, was teaching movement efficiency, starting with movement and then ending with strict, right? So we would meet in the middle.
And the really cool thing about that is in a CrossFit or a fitness environment is, the kid that Dave was talking about who walks into a gymnastics gym, he's going to take years to get strong, right? But the average CrossFit athlete who's already been doing it for a while and lifting, they kind of already shortcut that strength thing. So once we get the movement patterns down and they start understanding how we're trying to get them to move, they tend to already have most of the requisite strength that they need. So then their learning curve isn't like, the 10-year learning curve that we would see in a 4-year-old coming into gymnastics. They have a much shorter learning curve, which is really nice to see as well. But again, it all starts with movement, and then we can lay their strength on top of that.
Okay. So when you guys say it starts with movement, now I think when a lot of maybe coaches hear that, or myself included, they're like, oh, you're going to tear your shoulders apart doing kipping. Now, does that necessarily mean that you guys are starting off the bat, hey, here's how you do a kipping pull-up, or is that breaking it down into like very small subsets of the kipping pull-up that you guys want to see, kind of like stepping stones? Does that kind of make sense? Or
yeah, makes sense. I mean, I think that the point is that we treat movement and strength as parallel pathways. So you're training basic kipping with no pulling, no strength requirement. We're teaching that at the same time we're teaching basic pulling. So what we do is we kind of figure out where the athlete is on the strength side of the spectrum, and then we start over at the beginning of movement, and we start to build that up so that they become equal or parallel. And then from there, we work both platforms independently of one another, making sure that there's still a connection between the two. So we don't come in day one and say, oh, you're going to do a kipping pull-out, right, without assistance, right? We do a lot of assistance where we'll spot somebody through a movement pattern, or we'll use, trenches or boxes or whatever, so they can do the movement while they're building their strength, so that when they get to the point where they're going to do strict and kipping at the same time, it's not like we're starting to learn to kip after they've gotten strong. Because the biggest challenge is we get a lot of strong athletes in CrossFit that have gotten a lot of strict strength, but they can't move. So what happens is it's like we're going back 6 months to get them to do both kipping and strict at the same proficiency level. So what we try to do is just make sure that we start to introduce movement at the very beginning of the phases. As soon as they start CrossFit, everybody's doing basic kips. Everybody's doing basic safety rolling. Everybody's doing kind of movement, but not what you see on TV. It's not, I'm going to go bang out 15 kipping pull-ups because it's easier than doing 15 strict pull-ups. It's more along the lines of like, okay, let's just make sure that you don't have a deficit when you get strong.
Okay. Yep. So you guys are kind of like almost assessing where the individual is at. And I guess kind of what you guys have found was that CrossFitters were very strong, but then their movements were like lagging behind that strength. And so now what you guys were trying to do is catch the movement up to the strength metrics. And then from there, you guys can kind of parallel the two into better performance.
100%.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
So they can interchange.
So
right?
I guess
we want them to be able to mix in and out. We just want them to mix in and out between strict and between kipping and be equal, right? So that you could do a workout that's shorter that requires a strict movement, and then the next workout could be a higher rep sequence. And so now, we would do a kipping movement because it's more efficient, and that they can do each interchangeably. That's kind of what we're shooting for.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess in regards to that, like, what does your assessment process look like in that? Do you guys have like certain metrics you're looking for? Like, hey, we can see the individual moving like this, or we see that they have a lot of strength, or like, what is the assessment for the strength that you guys are using? And then like, what is the assessment for the movement that you guys are using?
So it all starts with mobility. If they have the right mobility, then they can do a lot of strict movements. Most people don't. The vast majority of people have weak shoulder flexion and weak thoracic extension, right? They're very posterior chain dominant, but the problem we see most of the time when we bring someone into our programming is that they're very tight in their shoulders and their upper back. And so therefore we start there. We start with basic kipping movements to use momentum and gravity to help them kind of open up their positions while we're doing static mobility. So once we get the body lined up and balanced, then we can either do strength or we can do kipping. It doesn't make a difference. But the vast majority of people are missing that kind of KPI metric, if you will, on just general mobility. So that's why we see people come to us for one of two reasons. Number one, they've tried everything else. They've tried every other gymnastics programming that's out there, and they're just not seeing the proficiency they want. The other reason they come to us is because they're just flat out hurt. They've stacked too much weight on top of bad alignment for so many years that they end up getting hurt. And then when they come to us, we kind of reset everything, go back to mobility first, build up their range of motion, and then we start stacking weight back again.
And that assessment starts in a couple of different ways. One is, when we're coaching live, for example, we do a seminar, our mobility segment takes typically around 40 minutes or so, which sounds kind of weird, but it's all very integrated into the curriculum that we do, so that as they're learning the mobility, they're also learning how to move on the rings, how to move on the bar, how to move through space in kipping and stuff like that, and creating, that common language and that common movement pattern that we're trying to create. And we're able to, hands-on see and assess mobility. It's funny because we can do, a group warm-up with, 20 athletes at a seminar, and then basically like a party trick, go around the room. Oh, you've never missed a snatch off the back. Oh, you really cannot open your hips. Your coach yells at you to open your hips on your clean all of the time. Oh, you really struggle getting your head through the window on a jerk, like all this stuff, right? You can see right away how people move, and that really ties into how they're going to move in that seminar. And then the other side of that is online. When we're doing online programming, we use the on-ramp that we have developed, where they show us a whole bunch of different movement patterns, as well as a lot of basic gymnastics type of skills and everything else that they have. And then we can really dial in what they need: shoulder flexion, hamstring mobility, hip flexor mobility, stuff like that, based on what we're able to see on the diagnostic movement patterns that we have them do. And that really sets the stage for their personal goals, things that they know they need to address on a daily basis in the gym, and then also how it's going to impact their learning curve for higher level gymnastic skills or even lifting skills.
Mm-hmm. So I guess, the individual that comes to you guys in pain is probably a little bit easier to buy in for mobility purposes, I would imagine. How do you get people to buy in that aren't necessarily in pain yet but need better movement quality?
A lot of times they kind of see it happen really quickly, because this actually used to happen a lot more often before we kind of got more exposure and stuff like that. I remember some early seminars we did, just seeing people, arms crossed, especially because a lot of the stuff that we talk about is very literally the exact opposite of what is out there for a lot of people. We're seeing a lot more of our techniques become more and more mainstream over time, which is nice. But really early on, we were basically like, we're doing something you've literally never seen someone teach before. So there tended to be a little bit more like you see the high level athlete, like kind of arms crossed, like, I'm not sure I'd buy this. But the second they get on the rings or get on the bar and feel the difference between efficient movement and inefficient movement, or movement that doesn't hurt their shoulder versus does hurt their shoulder, or movement where they can get on top of the bar and feel like they're not tired or dying, 5 reps in, where all of a sudden they're able to move more efficiently, more safely through space, easier, get back on the barbell faster, not be tired, that stuff. That's where you really see people buy in. And one of the probably best examples of that is something like a toast bar, which is typically what we hit first in our seminars live on the bar curriculum, because that's a spot where you can make a change in an athlete instantaneously. And we typically pick on the biggest, strongest, least mobile athlete. If you have a dude who's 6'5" and cannot touch his toes, we're like, show us some toes to bars. And they're terrible, usually very inefficient in terms of movement patterns. And then within 5 minutes, we can have him doing toes to bars efficiently, where he can breathe, where it feels easier. And he kind of all of a sudden gets that light bulb moment, like, oh yeah, I can move more efficiently. I can move better through space. I can save myself for other stuff in a workout. And that's where you tend to see people buy in kind of right away. They're like, oh, these guys really can get me moving more efficiently, really can get me moving safer. And that's where I can really start to make the progress that I've been missing this whole time, right?
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add to that is that, like, we have great athletes. If you go to our Instagram channel and you see our people move, they move differently than most. And so as time has gone on, most of the buy-in comes from watching somebody else who doesn't look like physically dominant, right? Like, just looks pretty normal, but then they start doing gymnastics and they're like, oh my God, like, how do they do 30 toes to bar in a row they don't look like they can do that many, right? They don't look as good in the mirror as I look. And then they're like, I want to figure out how to do that, right? Like I want to figure out how to look kind of normal and also completely kick ass when it comes to these movements. And so I think it's just a long road. We've been on it for a long time, but the athletes that have worked with us, everyone says the same thing, which is I just didn't think it was possible to be able to breathe when I worked out. Like to actually breathe in every rep and actually have a downtime period or a period where I'm able to relax as opposed to being always tense. And the entire time you feel like you're exerting energy, right? So I think it's a lot of the proof is in our athletes. And that's why we get more and more people to buy in. I mean, we have a record number of people that are using us today compared to where we've ever been. And it's just a constant progression of you see somebody move really, really well and you want to move well like that.
Yeah. I think something you just said there is like the ability to breathe through movements might be a little revolutionary for some people. Can you talk a little bit more about that and like how you guys are able to develop that ability? Does that make sense? Oh, did I cut out there?
Yeah, I think it's kind of breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, we lost a little bit of that audio with the question. Give us the short
okay,
version.
sorry. We all good? Yeah. So how do you guys kind of develop the ability to breathe through the movement, or how does that ability develop for an individual?
Right.
Yeah, so I think that it develops by the approach that we take, right? So we actually tell them when to breathe. We actually tell them to talk to themselves, which obviously increases breathing, right? Like when you can speak while you're doing something, you're breathing, right? So a big part of it is, for instance, on a kipping pull-up, we spend a lot of time teaching people to look for their toes and say the word toes. And then we teach them in the backswing to look for the bar and say bar, right? So part of it is just like the trick of the trade, which is get them to speak to themselves, get them to make their own cues so that their brain is hearing their own voice kind of like as they're going through it. And the other thing that we teach is we teach a period of time where you're falling and letting gravity do all the work. So you're not actually having to do any work while gravity's pulling you downward. And then when you hit bottom, you engage again and you go. And then whenever you kip and your body is at the top or the apex of the swing or the kip, that's when you engage again. So the combination of both having them talk to themselves and also teaching them when to fall and relax, the combination of those two things gets people breathing and gets them feeling relaxed at certain points of the swing. The other thing is, I would say in most of the clinics that we talk about, the number one word that we use is relax.
Yep.
We actually tell them you should be relaxed right here so that they understand that it's okay. Yeah. It's like literally okay to relax in your shoulders. Let your shoulders relax and feel open for a period of time. So that, and they're not used to that. Like when you first tell us, like we work with some great athletes, like super strong and like games quality athletes. And the first thing that we tell them is like, hang on the bar and then totally relax. And they're like, boom, all time. Like, no, wait, like really totally relaxed. And then they like release a little bit. And then we grab onto their hips and like put our body weight on and just pull down on them. And then they drop like 4 inches. They're like, oh my God, you mean that's what relax feels like? Like, yeah, that's what relax feels like. You're like, I've never felt that way in my entire freaking life. So I think part of it is just like, sometimes we just literally have to physically grab onto somebody and change the way they feel and like get our hands on it, right? Okay. And in remote athletes, we do the same thing, but we make them hang on the bar and when we give them feedback, we're like, no, that's not enough. And then the next time that they come in, all of a sudden they find that spot. There is a magic spot when you're doing any of this movement where you can totally relax. And when that happens and they feel it one time, they're like, I want that more. I want to be in that spot more than I want to be in the spot where I'm working. So it takes a little bit of time when we're remote. In person, it happens instantly, like right like this.
And what we see really clearly too with the relaxing, spoiler alert, CrossFit athletes in general tend not be great at relaxing or not be great at not going as hard as they can all of the time. But to Dave's point, in terms of getting people to be relaxed and also in order to be maximally efficient, like he said, we're working on that day one, right? With how to breathe, how to move through space without having to be intentional all the time. So, we use a lot of tricks like that, getting people to relax by, if they have an EMOM and there's 20 seconds left over, get them on the rings and let them breathe by swinging on the rings, using the ring swing, which is a nice, easy, basic gymnastics skill, the way we teach it, to become their recovery station during a workout. Get on the bar and do nice, easy, relaxed kipping. Let that become a recovery station. Get on the floor and work on your switch kick progressions for your handstand. Let that become a recovery station, because breathing and relaxing is a skill all into of itself, right? With CrossFit athletes, breathing is one of the last things they'll typically try to figure out when they're doing things like bar muscle ups or ring muscle ups, where you have to, like Dave said, program in where they're going to breathe. And you see the same thing even with high level gymnasts, right? I still coach gymnasts who are going off to, trying to get to college for gymnastics. And we'll put breathing into their routine just like we would any other skill. Like, it's different for a high level gymnast because there's different times that we breathe. So in a bar routine, which may last 17 seconds, as you swing up over the top of the bar and do the half turn on top of the bar and hit your handstand, take a breath, because in a bar routine for, a level 10 gymnast, a handstand is basically the only rest they're going to get in a bar routine. But they learn that they can take a breath there before their next skill, or they can finish a tumbling pass and as they turn, take a breath, or they can, figure out those times in a bar, floor, beam routine where their breathing becomes part of the routine. And part of that needs to apply to CrossFit athletes or fitness athletes as well, because they need to understand that if they're holding their breath the whole time or they're working the whole time, they're going to burn out so much faster than they would when they're relaxed, right? So when we're talking about efficiency, or we're talking about skills in general, if you take, say, a pie chart of a ring muscle up, right? Say the ring muscle up takes 1.2 seconds, right? And we have the pie chart. We should only really be working out of that 1.2 seconds for 0.2 or 0.3 seconds. The rest of it is relaxed. Letting gravity do the work for us, letting momentum do the work for us, letting our body's natural stretch reflex do the work for us. And then when it's time to go, we can go. And we can harness those principles and make our athletes understand those principles. And that's where they become really efficient with their movement. For example, I dropped into a workout a couple months ago now, but it had heavy thrusters. It was 135, which is death for thrusters. And then it was rowing, which was fine. And then it had burpee bar muscle ups. And everyone else in the class was like, oh my God, burpee bar muscle ups. And I was like, holy crap, thank God there are burpee bar muscle ups in this workout, because the thrusters are going to kill me. And no joke, the burpee bar muscle ups where I was like, oh, thank you, I can recover so I can go to thrusters and not throw up. Because if you understand the idea of relaxing, you can pace that burpee, you can hop up on the bar, you relax for 90% of the bar muscle up, you work for the 10%, and 5 bar muscle ups is easily the best part of that workout for someone who understands movement efficiency and thrusters, although I do hate thrusters more than the average athlete. But thrusters are hands down the worst movement in that type of a workout, right? So the idea that we can take a movement and break it down into just little pieces where you have to work kind of hard for a split second out of this whole skill is where we can become really efficient and kind of use the gymnastics to recover for the barbell movement or whatever else we have.
Yeah. So I guess this is maybe a little bit of a learning point for me, but should you be able to freely breathe through an entire gymnastics movement? Especially I've always understood the kip to be pretty aggressive, especially with kind of your hip drive. And that's personally where I noticed that I kind of tense up and hold my breath is on that hip drive over a ring or for a ring muscle up. But in your guys' experience, are you able to develop the ability to breathe through that, or what might be causing some things that create tension in those movements?
Yeah, so I would say that's very, we're looking at 100% of a movement, right? A full range of motion. And if you look at that, there is about 60 to 70% where you can be relaxed and breathe. The rest, there are times in different pieces of the movement where you have to tighten up. And And specifically to your point about hips and things like this, probably the biggest difference for us is that we don't stop at the hips. A lot of people, like when they do a ring muscle up, there's so much focus on hips, but the hips are just like one piece of your body. Our job is to use the whole body as one piece to do a ring muscle up, right? A lot of people will do like a kip on rings. They pop their hips, but they do nothing with their chest. And then they have to still muscle over the rings. If you let that wave, that hip explosion turn into a chest explosion and then to a backward row on the rings, then all of those like subtle movements, instead of one big area like hips, then all of a sudden you can kind of be more relaxed all the way through it, as opposed to like emphasizing that one point. So for me, I think that when I think about the gymnastics movements in CrossFit, it's pretty consistent across the board, with the exception of a strict handstand push-up. For the most part, you're relaxed 60 to 70% of the time, and the other 30% you actually have to work. And that 30% is not always at one point. It might be a little bit at the beginning, a little bit in the middle, and a little bit at the end. But collectively, you're 70% relaxed, 30% work. So when you have an athlete who doesn't understand that, and they're working 100% of the time versus the athlete who's only working 30% of the time, then it translates to more reps for the athlete who understands how to work for 30% of the time and harness gravity and muscle reflex to do that extra 70% without having to exert conscious energy.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So, so it's really about getting the athlete to figure out, pretty much like you guys are saying, how to relax.
Yeah, relax is the key word. The more you relax, the more reps you get. The more that you work, the less reps you get. And that is so weird. It's just like, I feel like every time we talk to somebody about this, they look at us like we're like, we have three heads or something,
Yeah. It's, I don't know if it's like the individual that comes into CrossFit or what, but they're just so like go all the time that to get them to kind of almost dial it back and be like, hey, like you can talk to me while you're doing this, like it's okay, is just like such a foreign concept to them. They just think they have to put in a bunch of power output to everything and be on the floor dying after every single workout or movement or whatever it is. So it's definitely an interesting concept to get, that shouldn't be that interesting to get people to buy into. But so I guess kind of going on a little bit further here. How do you guys, so like maybe let's say you do have an athlete that comes in, and we kind of chatted about this, I guess, a little bit before, but they are very mobile. What do you kind of do with that athlete at that point in time? Like they have to drive kind of their strength numbers up now, I guess. So they're pretty relaxed through their movements. They have really good positions. Like, what is the next step for that athlete?
Yeah, so everything's a progression, right? So the way we do everything is we break it down based on the skill type or the event that they're on, and we're going to keep them moving at the right pace. And we're often testing them, right? So it's not out of the ordinary for either of us to program something that's uniquely difficult for that athlete, right? Not that different than CrossFit, where we try to test their ability to adapt. We do the same thing in gymnastics, but we do it on independent tracks. So you're going to have an athlete whose mobility really needs the most work. So we're going to push them a little harder on mobility, but then maybe they're doing great on like the bar, right? We're gonna, rather than like push them ahead, we're just gonna let them get more reps in. So we look at this as like different tracks about how they train. So we try to, on occasion, push them beyond what they're capable of, but we dial it right back and we focus on those basics and make sure they're stable. And then we jump up a little bit and then we bring them back down. So I think the best way to kind of answer this is that we react to the athlete. We look at how they're performing, and we're very focused on like being tuned in with our athletes, as opposed to a global kind of workout programming, right? Like to me, like when I go to the CrossFit box, I do the same programming as somebody else. Now I might modify this skill or modify that skill, or I might take something a little higher than what somebody else would do, like add more weight or put on like a vest or do something like that to kind of take myself a little further on one movement versus another. But it's general programming in CrossFit. What we do is so specific, and we try to make sure that we're moving them on each track at the rate that they're going to see the most benefit, right? So that's kind of the difference about this custom programming versus like group programming, right? We start with group programming, and then as soon as we understand where their weaknesses are and where their strengths are, then we immediately bifurcate everything and start to get to this space where we're super custom.
And it's very common to see athletes who have some very big deficiency or some very big strength or several different ones based on either past injuries or body type, build, levers, stuff like that, weaknesses, strength, stuff like that in general, because, it's not uncommon to have somebody who is a, say, well, not really regionals anywhere, but like regionals level athlete who is legitimately scared to get into an actual handstand, right? They don't realize it probably, but they may be afraid to be upside down. So we may have to start with like the very, very bare bones basic handstand progressions with them, but we can get, as soon as they understand the basic foundational stuff that we're teaching on rings, they may be at a very high level on rings, basically week 2 of programming, but they may still be in, kind of kindergarten development type handstand progressions at that same time. And so the ability to kind of titrate these things at whatever level the athlete needs for whatever skill they need is something that's really important for the athlete, and also important, I think, as a coach or as coaches to be able to realize that, there's not a one size fits all approach to especially gymnastics. And that's something that I think is kind of lacking across the board in terms of coaching, not even just in CrossFit, just in general. I see like coaches kind of everywhere trying to just force people into boxes, basically, where, an athlete really needs to be addressed as an individual because everybody has strengths, weaknesses, mobility problems, past injury history, fears, stuff like that. And that's one of the things we talk about, especially in our coaching certification, is kind of like getting your athlete to lean into you in terms of what they need, what you can provide for them, understanding that you have that knowledge base so that you can get things out to them in whatever manner they need for their athletic development, as well as the way that they can get through things without being hurt or injured, or frustrated or things like that. And so that's kind of one of the big things that we talk about both with our athletes and also with the coaches that we teach, is how to see things, assess things, and then get athletes to buy into what you're teaching them, but also do it at whatever appropriate level they need for every skill that they're trying to create.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that. It's all so each athlete is so individualized. That's kind of what we as a company as well try and do from a CrossFit standpoint, is figure out kind of where they're at from a CrossFit standpoint, and then try and work and build them into a better individual based off of, their needs, injury history, athletic makeup, etc. So, very cool that you guys are doing that on the, gymnastic side as well. So, I guess another question that I think, maybe some more people who are trying to get skills might have is, what's kind of like the average time that it takes for an individual to learn something? And I'm sure there's going to be a pretty big variance on this. But like, I guess for you guys specifically, like how quickly can you get somebody to learn a new skill? I know you talked about it in the toes to bar earlier. And is there like kind of like, hey, we see that, semifinal regional level athletes, games athletes can pick up a skill this quickly. Maybe like class athletes or individuals that are doing this for fitness can pick up a skill this quickly. I guess just kind of walk us through what you guys are seeing there.
Yeah. So, I mean, in general, what we shoot for is the athlete's ability to be independent in self-assessing where they are. And then they have an understanding of the drills because we teach them our full curriculum, getting to a point where they can say, hey, look, like I'm here and this is my problem. They know what they're doing wrong. And then they go do like 10 of this drill and 10 of this drill. And then they go back and it's fixed. So for us, it's more about like most of the athletes that come in within about 2 to 3 months of our programming, they're at the level where they have the skills in their toolbox, or sorry, the drills in their toolbox, and they can self-identify what it takes for them to fix whatever their malfunction is, right? So when you look at like athletes of different levels, I actually think the most difficult athlete to coach is the highest level athlete, because in their mind they have these like predispositions about what it should look like and how it should work for them, and they get frustrated super easy, right? You take a class athlete and they move so fast through the programming, and the reason they do is because they don't have any bias. They've never had an imprint, right? So I would rather start with somebody who's never done this before, because everything you give them, they soak it in, they make the changes, they study their work because they're like super eager to get better. The better you are, the more you're like, I know how to do this. I've been to the games 5 times in a row. I'm a top 10 in the world, that kind of attitude. And again, even though a lot of those folks are still very humble, they're very good people and they're very humble, they still have this like unconscious bias towards their movement pattern. So I mean, to keep it really simple, most people see results within about 2 to 3 months with us, where they get to this level where they're like, okay, I got it. Right? They may text us, they may send us an email, they may say, hey, look, I'm stuck on this one thing and I can't fix it myself. Can you help me? Right? And that's how we measure it. We measure it based on when they reach that level of independence where they can self-diagnose and they can self-program for themselves, and they can use the drills that we've given them in their toolbox to get to a point where they can fix going. The one that people don't realize is that you never truly master anything to the point where it never screws up again, right? Like if you're kipping, even the best in the world will get off balance and all of a sudden have to come off the bar earlier than they expected, because they're in the middle of like a butterfly pull-up and they like lose rhythm and they don't know how to recover. So they get down, they start over, right? So everybody is that. And almost always there's a drill that we've prescribed previously that will allow that to fix itself. So they go back into the drill and then they get back on the bar and now they're back in rhythm again. And they keep that rhythm for a long period of time.
And what we see, like we were talking about, there's a huge amount of diversity too, in terms of how quickly people pick things up. We have like these averages, but there are so many big outliers on either side that it's, again, has to just be addressed at the individual level, really, because, something I talk about a lot of times with our athlete seminars is like, a lot of people go into a skill that they've never done before as like, this dragon that they have to slay, especially not to like stereotype, but especially for like female athletes and the ring muscle up. That's the big one we see, where they're like, oh my God, if I can just do a ring muscle up before I die, I can die happy. And we try to get people to like approach it differently, because if you go into a skill with that mindset, like you may have a very different learning curve than someone who's like, oh yeah, that'd be cool. Because, if somebody already has a pretty good baseline level of fitness and strength and everything else, they may pick something up very quickly if their mindset is such that they're able to adapt and, don't have any preconceived ideas or anything like that. I think the best example I have still, this was years ago now, but I worked with a guy named Austin who was a pro MMA fighter. And then before that, he was a college running back at a D1 program. So super athletic, as athletic as you can be, right? Very coachable also, because he had done, all these different great sporting things. And he dropped into a class that we had one night, our Sunday night class that's been going on forever. And we were like, hey, we're going to do some rings. Do you want to do rings? He's like, sure. Had never touched rings before. Literally had never like hung on a set of rings before. We went through the basics and everything else and progressions. And within like 10 minutes of doing drills and stuff, he popped up. I still have the video. He popped up the perfect vertical upright ring muscle up, right? And in the background, there's like 8 people standing around, and he just pops up on top of the rings. And he's up there and he looks around and he goes, was that good? And like everyone is like in shock, but it's because he was so strong and so athletic, but also had zero preconceived notions about how a ring muscle up should look, right? He had never watched Instagram videos of people telling him to do all the stuff that we don't teach people, or, telling people cues that we never use, or like, so when he came to us, he was just a blank slate. And so he was able to pick it up right away. Or, even in the Sunday night class, we'll teach people backflips. We don't typically do that in a CrossFit environment, but we have a full gymnastics gym that we have access to for our, local Sunday night class that we do. And people will come in and learn a backflip in 30 minutes, even though they may not realize that they're capable of doing that ahead of time, because maybe they don't have any preconceived notions of a backflip. Okay, I guess, can I do that? 100%. Can you do a box jump? Yes. All right, you can do a backflip. And even if they don't necessarily believe you, all of a sudden, 30 minutes later, they're legitimately doing a standing backflip by themselves on the floor because they already have the requisite strength and ability to move and explosive power and all that stuff. And then once they kind of get their head around it, they can do it, right? Or you may have an athlete who's really scared of a skill or thinks that this skill is something they'll never do. And there may be a really, really long building process of just getting the foundational movement there, taking the fear away, stuff like that. And so there's this wide variety of people who are able to pick up skills very quickly because they're high level athletes and can just, kind of turn their brain off and just kind of take what you're giving them. Or there are people who are very high level athletes and overanalyze things and, just think, well, I'm already doing it this way. I don't want to change things now. And that might be a really long learning curve. Or you could have somebody who's a relatively new beginner to the whole gymnastics process. And they may advance really, really quickly because they're just bought into the process, or they may be very stubborn and be like, well, I've seen Instagram videos that say that this is the way to do it. And, they may have a slower learning curve. So there's a huge amount of variety in there, and getting the individual athlete to kind of find their style that's going to help them. And then also as a coach, knowing how to program for that is a really big part of what we do, especially working with coaches and doing our certifications and stuff like that. Because once you understand what an athlete needs, you can deliver it to them really well. And that's one of the big things we talk about with like our coaching certifications, for example, is not just the gymnastics movement, but how to be a better coach, how to get things out of your athlete, how to get them to buy into the process, how to use the different types of coaching skills that we have in the toolbox to get their learning curve shortened or to get them to figure out how to move more efficiently, stuff like that.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I think that's a lot of information there. I think a lot of people are really gonna enjoy. So that's sweet. I guess kind of a last question here. I just kind of curious about this before we start wrapping up. Where would you guys like to see CrossFit go with gymnastics? So last year, for example, we saw the freestanding handstand push-up come into play at the games.
Right.
Like I'm sure you guys have opinions on that. But where would you guys kind of like to see CrossFit go next with gymnastics?
So I have a real strong opinion on this. I think that the biggest mistake we make is that we use gymnastics, very high level of movement, to test or separate our top CrossFit athletes, but yet the preparation isn't there, right? And I'll go back to when we had top male athletes doing ring handstand push-ups. I don't remember when that was, but it wasn't that long ago. The ring handstand push-up. There you go. The ring handstand push-up.
That long ago?
That seemed like a long time. But the ring handstand push-up is counterproductive for an athlete unless they understand the basics of that movement. It is not a positive movement for that body. Mainly, if you watched it, you saw how their lumbar spine was so compressed. You can just imagine what was happening with their vertebra. And the reason that is because what we don't do is what in the sport of CrossFit is we don't fill space in workouts with the building blocks of gymnastics. What we do is we say, here's the standard, now go after it. And we allow people to find their way to it. And fundamentally, that is not going to assist us in building better overall athletes. What we have to do is we have to start integrating the basic building blocks of gymnastics at the very beginning stages when people start the sport. So when they walk in the door day one, I'll give you a basic example. We have an AMRAP with 3 movements in it, right? Let's call one of those movements heavy deadlifts. The newer athlete is going to have to rest after heavy deadlifts. There's no way they can avoid taking 10, 15, 20 seconds to kind of recoup before they go do another movement. Even the best programmers are going to face that. So in that filler time, if we would fill that filler time with a movement that keeps their body working, but doesn't tax their body, and we make that universal across the sport of CrossFit, then what we get is people that can eventually get to that point where they can do a good, solid, quality ring handstand push-up, so that it's not the first time they witness that skill when all of a sudden they're trying to be, trying to be in a competition where they're separating themselves from the best of the best, right? So I think it's about integrating basic gymnastics at the ground level in all programming, right? One of the things that we do in CrossFit is we separate gymnastics and training for gymnastics and coaches training as a separate piece of your coaching certification. When people recognize that gymnastics is the foundation of all sport, not just CrossFit, not just weightlifting, it is literally the foundation of all sport, and they start to integrate it, and they start to integrate basic movements in the rest time, so the rest time doesn't even exist, that's when we go to a spot where we have athletes that get to this level and they're not destroying their spine. That's key to me.
Okay.
One of the ones we talk about a lot is the wall walk, for example. And we talk about it all the time with our coaching certifications, right? A wall walk is a technical skill that will help you develop a higher level skill, and it should never be programmed for time or reps or anything else. It should be programmed for quality, right? And then, now they're throwing wall walks at everything basically as fast as possible. But there's nothing wrong with, one of the cues we give coaches, for example, with wall walks is like, okay, if or as an athlete, right? If you're at a gym that doesn't, buy into our principles or whatever, it doesn't have any real exposure to us, and they're like, all right, you have to get X number of wall walks done each round, cut that number down by like 75%, do 25% of those wall walks, but do them very high quality, so that you're able to still get plenty of workout, plenty of stimulus and adaptation, but also you're learning now the movement pattern that we're trying to get to happen, right? There's a million ways to get an athlete's heart rate up, not to just pick on wall walks, but this is like the easy answer. But there's a million ways to get the athlete's heart rate up, and like really wall walks shouldn't be one of them. It's right. A technical skill that should be programmed for technical mastery, not for just getting someone's heart rate. So one of the examples I use all the time, like Dave was talking about, the building blocks, is that people kind of don't think of gymnastics the same way they would think of a lot of other skills, right? If I have a standard that is a ring muscle up, people will just try the ring muscle up over and over and fail over and over without making any real progress. But if you the way I get coaches to kind of buy into this in a CrossFit environment is like, if somebody walks in off the street, right, and they're like, hey, I just watched the Olympics and I saw people doing Olympic weightlifting, and I think one of those is called like the snatch. They take the bar over their head, and that looked really cool. Like this dude put a lot of weight up, and I would love to learn how to do that. And I was looking online, which is the kiss of death for most of the stuff. But I was looking online, and at my size, I think I should be able to snatch like 200 pounds at some point, right? And you're like, yeah, that's a totally realistic goal. At your size, 100% you can snatch 200 pounds. As a coach, you wouldn't stick 200 pounds on the bar and be like, all right, here's how a snatch works. Throw it over your head. They wouldn't do it. And I'm like, all right, well, you weren't able to do it today. Come back tomorrow. We'll have 200 pounds set up on the bar again. Walk in. You still can't snatch 200 pounds. 6 months later, 200 pounds is on the bar. All right, I think you can snatch 200 pounds this time. Still not going to happen, right? You would start that person with a PVC pipe. Then they'd eventually graduate to like the 15-pound training bar. And then finally they get like the big light red bumpers. And then finally they're using a real barbell. And then finally they're, incrementally adding weight, like the little white change plates. At some point, they just get to where they can only add 2.5 pounds at a time or whatever. And that's how they eventually are, yes, able to snatch 200 pounds. But people don't look at gymnastics movement the same way. They don't see those bite-sized pieces that they need to be able to do and linearly progress. And so it becomes very frustrating, both as an athlete, when you think I should just be able to do this, it's just moving my body, and as a coach who may not have the knowledge base of how to progress that, right? Because if you can teach like a basic lift, deadlift, for example, then you can do the progression on that. You don't have to be the world's best programmer to be like, all right, well, next week, add 5 pounds to that lift. Perfect. You're able to do it. Next week, add 5 more pounds. You're just teaching the same lift with a little bit more weight each time, right? But gymnastics, until you really understand the concepts behind it and how to create the movement patterns and the drills and everything else in an athlete, you may be banging your head into the wall as an athlete and as a coach, and your athletes may be doing the same thing as an athlete because you're not able to progress the way that you want to, or you're not able to get your athlete to progress the way you want to. And that's one of the big things we do too, is kind of getting coaches to understand, like, this is a long-term progression, a long-term investment in movement, because you should be able to move well basically till the day you die. And so if you kind of think of that, I mean, like, on a big scale, like, I don't really expect to not ever be able to do a ring muscle up. I mean, at any point in my life, I kind of imagine I'll still be able to do one basically till I kick the bucket, hopefully. But it's because I understand that, like, it's a long-term ability to move well through space, versus like, I just have to be able to do it this one time, you know, by next week because there's something coming up where I need to be able to have it or something like that, right? Getting people to understand that long progression, that lifelong devotion to, like, learning how to move well, and then the incremental steps they need to take along the way is what makes a more healthy, more complete, more fulfilled athlete, versus what we see a lot of times where I just want to be able to do it now. I just need to be able to do this quickly. I don't really care if it's right or not. I just have to be able to do it. And I think that's the big kind of concept we try to bring athletes and coaches on board with, is this idea that they can move well for life, and also understand that it's stuff that we can do for a long period of time. You should be able to do some sort of gymnastics movement and move well indefinitely, right?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd like to add just one more piece to this, very specifically. If CrossFit would change their certification structure so that the first tier is not CrossFit level 1, the first tier is gymnastics level 1, it would fix everything. The problem right now is that we start with CrossFit and the modifications of CrossFit, and then we bring gymnastics to the side. Gymnastics is the foundation. It's body weight movement. You should never pick up weight. You should never add, objects or other items until you've mastered the basics of human movement, right? So functional movement is based on that. Like when you go do a squat, you do an air squat, you don't grab the barbell. It doesn't work that way. It's you master the right shape and the safe movement on your knees before you put weight on top of it. And so I think that in itself is the next step for CrossFit, is for them to recognize that gymnastics comes first, and then you stack all of these other more complicated movements on top of it.
And I think the proof of that is in how you see gymnasts become so good at every other sport, right? I mean, you can take somebody who's a high-level gymnast and they've never really touched a barbell, and they will become a very high-level Olympic weightlifter within a couple of months of learning Olympic weightlifting, because they already understand human movement. They understand they've already gotten really strong. They understand how their body moves through space, and they already can take technical feedback and reduce it down to the level that they need, which is, like Dave said, kind of proves the point that gymnastics is the foundation of sport, because we see it time after time, right? Basically, every single one of my gymnasts who doesn't go on to college for whatever reason, injury, gets burned out, just isn't quite good enough to make it to the next level or whatever. Like the ones who pick up another sport do it really, really well, really, really quickly, because they already know how to move. And so to Dave's point, the ability to move your body first lets you adapt and become good at everything else you want to do. And I think that's foundationally the approach that probably should be taken. Don't know if it ever will be, because it's a lot sexier on Instagram to deadlift 500 pounds than it is to like do a really, really clean wall walk. But the idea is the same, right? If you can move your body well, you can now integrate that into everything else that you're doing athletically.
Yeah. So I guess long answer short, you would actually like to see them almost take a step backwards to take a step forward, or right. 2 steps forward.
Like 10 steps forward. It's really that simple. Is that gymnasts succeed in every sport that they do because of one reason and one reason only. They prepared their body and their mind to be successful. And from there, you can launch a CrossFit career, you can launch a diving career, you can launch a Olympic lifting career, because you have 2 things. You have mobility and strength. That's what gymnastics creates, mobility and strength. It's not just strength, it's not just mobility, it's the combination of mobility and strength.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. I dig it. Anything to make athletes more healthy I'm all about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, yeah, well, I guess we're hitting about an hour here, so this is typically about how long we run our podcast for. So, thank you again, guys, for coming on. There's a lot of good information, I think, for people in here, so we really appreciate it. And you guys are doing some pretty awesome work inside of CrossFit athletes movement quality. So, really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us. It was fun.
For sure. How do guys find you, get a hold of you, book one of your camps, find some of your personal training?
Yeah, i99fit.com. Just hit our website. That's the best way. There's all kinds of ways in which you can, kind of get through the site and find what works for you. I mean, we have so many different options, right? You can start with us and you can do an on-ramp, and it's really affordable. Gives you a taste of what we do. It's like $40 for 2 weeks. It's super inexpensive. That gives you a sample. It gets you through the basics. We know where you stand. We can advise you where to go next. All the way to just drop into our clinics, like sign up on our website for some place that we're doing an event. And then, we even have for a comp, and you got to do a ring muscle up or a bar or a keeping pull up better. We do a tune up too. So we just have a lot of different options on our website. And you can kind of pick which path works best for you based on your time, based on your ability level. And of all things, we just want to talk to you. We just want to spend time and kind of understand what your journey is. Neither of us do this as our primary thing. We do it for fun. We make enough money to keep it alive for 9 years. And we'll probably be here another 9 years from now doing the same thing, trying to make a difference in people's lives.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, yeah, thank you again for coming on, guys. And if you guys are listening still, please give us a follow on Instagram, blacklisted.hq. Like and subscribe on our YouTube channel, and we will catch you all next time. Thank you again.
Yeah.
Thanks.